the first time I heard that song. Well, one thing the Greens are doing, they're generating art, that's for sure. Great posters, songs, poems. Next thing you know, there'll be an ode to Hillary Clinton. Well, nice to be with you. We just had a news conference on Pennsylvania's ballot access laws, which are quite clearly now the worst in the nation. As Carl Romanelli said earlier, you have to bet your house to run for office in Pennsylvania. And there's a value to putting the corrupt system under pressure. As long as the system is not challenged, its corruption will not be visible. It's only when it's provoked that the fangs come out, the ugliness, the bile, and what we should now call it, the political bigotry. This is what it is. This is not just politics as usual, throwing candidates off the ballot in all kinds of ways, using partisan political judges who misread the law, using the legislators to write laws that are rigged against competition. The two-party elected dictatorship is getting worse by the year. Almost everything the Greens accused the two parties of in the year 2000 is an understatement. The Republicans ravage the country, and the Democrats don't stop them. There's not much virtue in that latter position. So we're in this war quagmire in Iraq, which is unconstitutional, illegal, a violation of our treaties, like the Geneva Conventions, a war that was launched against the best judgment of many retired generals, admirals, diplomatic officials, intelligence people in both administrations prior to George W. Bush's. This is the first war that's been opposed by the military, diplomatic, and intelligence establishment. And yet, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney plunged us into this war on a platform of lies, deceptions, cover-ups, repeated again and again, day after day, month after month, after they were exposed and documented by the most established media and whistleblowers inside the Bush administration, among others. This is a recidivist, criminal regime that should be impeached and convicted in the House and in the Senate. These are not metaphors or adjectives. In one ground of impeachment after another, an impartial tribunal would find Bush and Cheney guilty. If they were in the courts of law under the tort system, they would be found guilty of criminal negligence for repeatedly, month after month after month, leaving U.S. soldiers without adequate armor and adequate cover for their Humvees. They would, under the Geneva Convention, they would be tried as criminals for the slaughter and the death of 600,000 to 700,000 Iraqi civilians in Iraq, which the Pentagon has reduced in its official figures to 60,000 to 70,000. I tell you, Iraqi's skin must be made of steel and other alloys, 60,000 to 70,000. They don't have the decency to even count the civilian deaths, massacres. The situation in Iraq, brought upon by Bush and Cheney and permitted by the Democrats, is now worse in almost all respects than under Saddam. Less drinking water, less health care, less security in the streets. Can you imagine? Bush has turned in a performance worse than Saddam. Saddam said there were no weapons of mass destruction. Bush said they were. Saddam told the truth, and Bush lied. I mean, what kind of president is it? What kind of president is it that comes in behind a brutal dictator like Saddam Hussein? That's how bad it is. 80% of the Iraqis now want us out in spite of the security problem, in spite of the massacres, in spite of the deprivations. That's how bad it is. 72% of U.S. soldiers in Iraq, polled by Zogby in January 2006, 72%, including a slight majority of Marines, wanted us out of there within 6 to 12 months. The soldiers right there in the field. You didn't probably hear about that poll, did you? Look at democracyrising.us. You'll get the straight scope. democracyrising.us. That was not challenged by the Pentagon either. This was a field poll, professionally done. You can imagine what it is now, 18 months later. This is a regime that doesn't have the decency to even give us the official casualty list of U.S. soldiers injured in Iraq, because they only count the injuries in actual combat, not in the theater of war known as Iraq. And so instead of 27,000 injuries, there are over 70,000 injuries. And the Democrats don't make a point of that. The Democrats could have stopped Bush and his tax cuts for the wealthy in 2001, in 2002. They could have stopped the war. They could have stopped almost everything he got through Congress if they had the guts to use the forums of public opinion, the filibuster, and their votes. The corporate takeover of Washington would now meet the criteria established by Benito Mussolini's PhD thesis, which is a definition of the corporate state. Corporations are increasing their power over every government department, every agency, more and more members of Congress. They have corrupted our elections, controlled our government, commercialized our universities, commercialized childhood itself, blocked one reform and one social justice movement after another. Make a list of 15 of the major changes you would like to see in this country, like living wage, like Medicare for all under cost controls and quality control, like a complete junking of the corporate-favored indentured tax system, where the New York Times reported a few days ago, corporations are reaching a point where they can determine what taxes they want to pay and what they don't pay. Make a list of more things. Make a list of the rights of family farmers. Make a list of abolishing poverty. Make a list of all these things and ask yourself one question. Who is repeatedly with power saying no? It's big corporations. It's big trade associations. It's their corporate law firms and their control over government and our elections. And they got to be stopped. Corporations, as you know, were chartered in the early 1800s to be our servants, not our masters. They've now become our masters. They've even become the masters of small business. Just imagine. Remember when I said in 2000 that green values are majoritarian values? Well, all these issues, you look at the polls, whether it's on the environment, whether it's on labor, whether it's on the small taxpayer, whether it's on preservation of the land, whether it's on cleaning up the drinking water, whether it's on health care, all the polls, whether it's on corporations have too much control over their lives. That was 72% of the people in the Business Week poll. All of these reflect Green Party majoritarian values. Now, doesn't that pose something? Did you see the cover of Fortune last week, which had a picture of Hillary? Why big business loves Hillary? Look it up. We have another round of Clintons coming? Here's what we need to ask ourselves. What is it that is lacking in people today who feel so powerless, who feel they don't count and they don't matter, that even when they see candidates whose record, not just whose views, at the local, state, and national levels, whose candidates they believe in, but they feel so powerless in a rigged two-party winner-take-all electoral system that they will not vote for the people they respect, believe in. They will vote for, at best, the least worst of the two parties. And when you vote least worst, and you signal least worst, and you don't make demands on least worst, they're both going to get worse every 4 years, aren't they? And that is the burden or dilemma, if you want to choose a kind word, of the liberals today. The liberals, by not making Kerry better, by signaling to him that he had their vote for granted, ended up making Kerry worse because he didn't have to worry about their vote. He had their vote. The anti-war vote took off in 2004, didn't it? They didn't have those rallies. They were so freaked out by Bush the warmonger that they gave Kerry a free ride. And on the first debate with Bush, he out-warmongered Bush, said the Wall Street Journal in an approving editorial. You remember that famous statement he made? We wouldn't have pulled out of Fallujah. 2 months later, Bush went into Fallujah and slaughtered and slaughtered and slaughtered. And he knew he had the cover of the Democratic Party. So the real question is not what we have on the agenda. It's not the green values. It's how do we get people motivated to believe in themselves, to respect themselves, before they begin generating a politics of respect for all American people. That's the key. I often refer to Marcus Cicero's definition of freedom, which, by the way, is a great definition to convey when you're trying to persuade people or talking with people around the country. Freedom is participation in power. Most people, when they're asked, do you have freedom in America? They say, well, of course. And you say, what do you mean? Well, they say, I can travel anywhere I want. I can marry whoever I want. I can take a job wherever I want. I can buy whatever I want. I can criticize the president anytime I want. Of course I've got freedom. That's personal freedom. That's not civic freedom. That's not civic freedom. Civic freedom is participation in power, political power, economic power, social power, electoral power. That's what freedom is. And don't let those politicians misuse that word and couple it with liberty, especially when they never utter the word justice, without which there would be no freedom or liberty. Here in Pennsylvania, which is now the King Kong of ballot access busters of all the 50 states and Commonwealth of Puerto Rico in the Union, there's no state where you have to bet your house to run for office. As Carl's pointed out, this state, because of the perfection of the shenanigans and the institutionalized corruption to keep third-party candidates who they think present a challenge off the ballot, is going to be replicated around the country if we don't stop it here in Pennsylvania. And the Democrats have pushed the envelope to a new level of obstruction. They must be very pleased with themselves because they've done it in conjunction with a Republican corporate law firm Reed Smith, one of the 15 largest law firms in the world, took the Nader Camejo candidacy on with dozens of lawyers and paralegals and others in one courtroom after another. Because did you know that Pennsylvania is the only state where reviewing signatures on petitions is done by judges instead of a state administrative commission? And guess who are these judges? Well, they just happen to be elected as Democrats. Isn't that comfortable? You're up against the very opponent who's going to judge you. And so we had twice the number of signatures needed, and here's how they took care of our ballot access. They knocked off 8,000 signatures because voters had addresses on the petition different from the addresses they had when they registered. Gee, people move, huh? They knocked out another 8,000 signatures because voters who signed our petitions were not registered to vote. There is nothing in Pennsylvania state law that requires registration before signing a petition. And that was pointed out by Justice Saylor of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, who somehow couldn't convince his less diligent colleagues of that simple interpretation of the statute. And so by the time they were through, we went from 51,000 to 7,000 short, about 18,000. We were down to 18,000. One day we got a demand from the courts that we had to be in 13 courtrooms on Monday morning at the same time in Pennsylvania to address Reed Smith's challenges. Reed Smith, by the way, represented John Kerry, Teresa Kerry, and the Heinz family. Reed Smith was paid over $100,000 in 2004 to do, quote, political and legal work for the Democratic National Committee in Washington, headed by Howard Dean. But Reed Smith decided to do this all by pro bono. And after they won their malicious judgments, which someday will be looked back with disgrace, just like the old civil rights judgments against African Americans in the South in the 30s and 40s on voting rights, we on candidate rights are going through much of this same judicial obstruction. Fortunately, we don't have to face sheriffs and dogs, at least not yet. They went the next step. They got the judge to interpret Pennsylvania law where they could assess us $81,000 in court costs and handwriting expert fees. We were the first candidacies in American legal history who had to pay court costs of those who objected to our candidacy access on the ballot. Never in the history of the United States. And Carl Romanelli was next, 2 years later. So you see what's coming? Okay. Now, how did Judge Collins, the Democrat judge, misread the statute? Well, according to Justice Saylor, clearly a very respected, learned judge, and Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, you know, some judges just work harder than others. They study harder. They think harder. He said that the word petitioner in the statute only allowed the assessing of court costs by candidates against unsuccessful objectors, not by objectors against candidates. But it didn't work. Collins got a majority of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, who never answered the analysis of Judge Saylor. Now we're going to see it in Ohio, and we're going to see it in Arizona, and we're going to see it in Oregon, and Illinois, and Florida. And you know what it amounts to? It amounts to the confiscation of the constitutional right and the expression of the First Amendment to speak, petition, and assemble by third-party and independent candidates who are seen as a challenge to one of the two major parties who are part of the two-party elected dictatorship in this country. That's what's at stake. We are the only country in the Western world who has such obstructions. At the news conference, there was a Canadian Green. She kept just smiling, wondering, how did we end up in this mess? It's so much easier in Canada to get on the ballot, so much easier to start a party, so much easier to get on the debates. And here we have a corporation called the Commission on Presidential Debates, created by the two major parties in 1987, and they decide who reaches tens of millions of people through the networks on presidential debates. We're the laughing stock of the Western world. Even Jimmy Carter can't monitor elections in the U.S. because his 5 criteria are violated in the U.S., including having decisions on counting of votes being made by partisan political entities instead of nonpartisan commissions. Of course, Jimmy Carter has trouble defending the right of third parties to get on the ballot in the United States compared to South America and Africa and Asia. That's quite a contrast for an otherwise very noble and very uplifting ex-president. But you see how deep it goes, you see how deep this political bigotry goes. It doesn't matter whether they're Nobel Prize winners, professors of political science, whether they are precinct workers for the Democrats, whether they are members of AARP, it doesn't matter. They all have the same attitude. That is, we are the ones who take votes away from the Democrats and Republicans. It's not the Republicans and the Democrats in a rigged, corrupt system that take votes away from us. Put us on the national debates, and we'll show you how many votes we can take away from the Democrats and Republicans. Put us on the state debates. You know, Jesse Ventura was 8% in the polls about 6 weeks before the election. Here's what happened. This is a three-way race. In Minnesota, you have same-day voter registration. In Minnesota, he got $300,000 and some dollars from state money, campaign finance. And in Minnesota, he got on 10 debates with his Democratic and Republican opponent. And he went from 8% to a win on election day. You see what happens when the system is slightly less rigged? Well, we got a lot of work to do. And unfortunately, it isn't just on an agenda. It's on just getting on the ballot. Getting on the ballot to have a voice, to use our First Amendment rights. So here, apart from saying we got to scrap these 50 state ballot access laws when you're running for federal office, there should be one federal ballot access statute, period. Here in Pennsylvania, here's where you get your motivation in Pennsylvania. You're far worse in this respect than New Jersey. Do you realize how serious that comment is? In New Jersey, I got on the ballot with 1,000 signatures. 1,000 signatures. In New Jersey, they look at the voter's name, registered, that's it. They don't have 5,000 different curlicues. And I keep hearing more and more of them, even today. I mean, unbelievable curlicues. Some signatures were dismissed because they were put in, there was an impermissible difference between a ballpoint pen and a flare pen. I've seen around the country our signatures were dismissed because an elderly person wrote in her handwriting and it squiggled on the next line. They dismissed the entire sheet. The entire sheet. Bigotry. This is political fascism. We've got to call it for what it is. We know what it is. Just think of the traditional American support of the underdog. It works in baseball. It works in football. It works in basketball. It works in hockey. It even works in many business arenas. You know, you're really going for that little software firm. You're really going for that little ethnic restaurant taking on the chains. The American support for the underdog. But when does it stop short? It stops short in the electoral arena because the voters are basically told, forget these people. Forget that they come from a long line of tradition where they have been right, again and again and again, against slavery, for women's right to vote, for uplifting labor standards, right on Social Security before the two parties, right on Medicare before the two parties, right on federal regulation of corporate crime, fraud, and abuse before the two parties, right on respect for small taxpayer money not being ripped off and stolen by the Halliburtons and the Exxons and Mercs of this country. Right on universal health care to replace this miserable system where 18,000 Americans die every year and hundreds of thousands get sick or stay sick because they can't afford health care. 18,000 Americans. Who weeps for them? That's 6 9/11s. And it's every year, according to the Institute of Medicine of the National Academy of Science, a very conservative estimator. And they're still not for the underdog because they've grown up in a two-party monopoly. They've grown up in a winner-take-all system with no proportional representation, with no instant runoff, with no public financing, with no opening to debates. A winner-take-all system. And they are told, none of these people can win. It ain't gonna happen. Forget it. You're wasting your vote. The only vote you waste is when you vote for someone you don't believe in. That's what we've got to get across. I wonder if the vote waster crowd in this country thinks the people in the 19th century who wasted their vote supporting the anti-slavery party, was that a wasted vote? No. Who wasted their vote supporting the small women's right to vote party, was that a wasted vote? No. You think they sat around saying, well, I wonder who's least worst on women's right to vote and slavery, the Whigs or the Democrats? Let's really talk about that, huh? Aren't we glad that there were courageous people in those years who voted their conscience, who brought their conscience to the polls? We've got to argue this out with thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. We've got to really converse more and more with people. Someone said to you, Nader cost Gore the election in 2002. And when they say that, they walk away, so you only have 3 seconds to answer. Ask yourself, how would you use those 3 seconds? Of course, obviously, I've confronted people like that, and none of them ever want a dialogue. One just this morning in front of the West End Library branch in D.C. We're having a rally because the D.C. City Council gave away the library, police station, fire station to a developer to rebuild and rip off the district. Imagine, with no hearings. They gave away the public trust, the public interest, and the public property. So this guy is coming around, going in the library, says, you elected George Bush. I said, I thought Gore won. He was gone. He comes back out. You elected George Bush. But Gore got more votes. Bush stole the election. Gore recognizes that. He's gone. You see, that's a sign of political bigotry. That's a sign that they got the ideology down. And they're not all bad people. They're people who you've got to get in dialogue. I was told by more than a few people who had that view of 2000 that when they saw an unreasonable man, it actually changed their mind. So, now, the other day, there was an article, a McClatchy article, quoted Professor Larry Sabato, University of Virginia, political scientist, the most quoted political scientist in the mass media. And he said, it's absolutely clear Nader cost Gore the election. You see how deep this goes? This is third grade analysis, maybe second grade. For example, I would say, Larry, he went to Princeton the way I did. So, hey, Larry, let me ask you, would Gore become president if he got Tennessee, everything else being equal? Would he become president if he got Arkansas, everything else equal? Would he become president if 250,000 Democrats didn't switch and vote for Bush in Florida? Would he become president if David McReynolds hadn't run on the Socialist Workers' Party? Poor David's lucky. He's escaped all this. Would he become president if Kathleen Harris, Jeb Bush didn't conspire before, during, and after the election to steal the election from Al Gore? Would he become president if the mayor, the Democratic mayor of Miami, didn't skip town and go to Madrid for 11 days before the election and not turn out his votes because he had a tiff with the local Democrats? Now, Larry, why are you only picking one what if? Why are you picking on the Greens? Because you don't want your precious Democrats to be challenged. You don't want a competitive election. You don't want a competitive democracy, except between the two parties that are becoming more and more alike, where the similarities tower over the dwindling real differences that the two parties are willing to really fight over. And then, and apart from all that, as Professor Solon Simmons of George Mason University has pointed out, you should get his material. It's still on the website, votenader.org, for that purpose. He said that the dynamics between an election are such that by pushing Gore, in spite of Lieberman's advice, to make a more populist acceptance speech, he went up in the polls when he started going after, rhetorically at least, the insurance companies, oil companies, drug companies. There were people who were so freaked out by the Greens, they weren't going to vote for the Democrats. They rushed out at the last minute to vote for the Democrat. What are we doing with this nonsense spoiler business? We're either all spoilers of one another, trying to get votes for one another in a competitive election, or none of us are spoilers. That is a bigoted word. Why am I dwelling on this? Because it's still a disease in this country. It's still what you have to contend with every day, right? Okay, so we got to lance the boil here. When they say, oh, the Greens spoiled 2000, you say, gee, I thought Bush got more votes than we did. Why isn't the Bush the spoiler? He's the thief of the election. At least we can call him a spoiler. And how in the world do you spoil a corrupt, spoiled system? That's like satiring satire. I don't know quite how to do that. Unless we break through on that, unless we develop a greater tolerance, we won't make the advances that the civil rights movement made. This is sheer bigotry. And it's very crude. And it deals with corruption of our political, electoral, and vote counting processes. And we've got to deal with it. Otherwise, the you can't win phenomena will continue to plague third parties and independent candidates. I never thought that Mexico and Brazil were up to our level in democratic processes. But you know something? In the United States of America, you could never elect a Lula in Brazil or an Obrador in Mexico, in this country. That's how rigged it is. You can't even elect a populist candidate anymore, even if that populist candidate comes from the Democratic Party. Now, I don't consider Edwards a great populist, but at least he's talking about the poor. He's talking about the deprived. And guess what? There was a poll recently of Americans who earn less than $20,000 a year. And they stacked up Hillary and you know, all the major Democratic candidates, including Kucinich and Obama. And you know what Edwards got? Mind you, this is his second run. He's not exactly unknown. He got 9% in the poll. Here's the only Democrat that has smashed the convention of only referring to the middle class. You go through all of Clinton's speeches, and you ask how many times he said middle class and how many times he said poor. Almost never poor. That was considered evoking images of the welfare state and welfare queens, and that would lose you votes among the middle class and certain suburbs. So he's the first person who's done that, and he does it every day, every day. And he gets 9% in the polls with people who earn less than $20,000 a year. So let us look for a moment, my friends, at the voters. Let us ask ourselves, why don't the voters do their homework and give themselves a chance to make an informed vote? Why don't the voters vote for candidates who represent them, sweating out year after year after year, instead of voters who flim-flam them, who flummox them, who flatter them, and who betray them before and after the election day? That's what we have to ask them. You say, okay, now let's see, you want a living wage? You want health care for your kids and your parents? Yeah. Well, you know, there's one person in the Democratic Party who's been saying that and voting that and running on that, and he can't even get 3% of your vote, and his name is Dennis Kucinich. What's wrong with you? He's a Democrat. You are a Democrat. It's very important. We passed out in 2004 a little piece of paper in the hundreds of thousands, and we had Kerry and Bush and Nader Camejo's positions. And on the other side, we had where the voter would be. So they would see that their votes were contrary to Kerry and Bush, but they were consonant with Nader Camejo. Just to make that point. Give yourself a chance. Spend some time in the fall. Study the record. Open the mind. Have a debate with your neighbors. Come alive. We can't anymore pander to voters in that way because they're victims. It's only victims that overpower the oppressors. Only victims overpower the oppressors. And we've got to talk that way to them. Not with any bad words or language, but with a rhetoric of liberation. A rhetoric where we give them the feeling that they do have the power if they believe in themselves, if they act on it. They do have the power. Patti Smith is right. The people have the power, but they've got to realize it, organize it, and hold it against the corrupt oligarchs and plutocrats and big corporations. Let me end on this note. I read a lot of well, I can't read a lot because there's too many, of the Green Party memos. And usually I ask the question, are those memos focusing on corporate globalization and domination of our political economy and the right of people to fulfill their life's possibilities? Or are they focusing on technical disagreements between Greens? Or are they focusing on tactics and strategies that almost never connect with the dramatic fundamental changes we need in this country because they still keep talking about tactics and strategies, often in isolation? Let me give you some gratuitous advice. The Green Party will only grow if you multiply your numbers geometrically, fast, and relentlessly. There is not enough energy to do what you want to see done. You know that as well as I. There has to be a way where active Greens who actually do the work report to one another that they've brought in 10, 20, 15, 18, 30. I've been to 45, 50 Green Party fundraisers, and I look in the audience and I see some Greens who can really give substantial money, but they don't. And if you don't have an office in every state with a full-time staff, one staff, how are you going to grow? In fact, I think I'm going to have a little fun here. I'm going to have a little fundraiser right now. It won't take very long. And it's all going to go to your party. And some of you have seen this work before. It's actually raised several $1,000s in places like Madison and Berkeley and even New Jersey. Remember this priority pen? Now listen to this. This pen came out in 1999. And when you open it up, the defense budget was $291 billion. It is now more than double. It's over $620 billion. And we have no more Soviet Union. And communist China is rapidly converting criminal communism into criminal capitalism. They're interested in our jobs and our industry, not sending missiles here. So you talk to people and you say, you think through 291 billion? That's a lot, isn't it? Well, it's 630 and growing. And then on the 40th anniversary of Unsafe at Any Speed, we put out an exact replica of this book, which generally assumed to have launched the modern consumer movement and led to the motor vehicle and highway safety laws. This is a commemorative edition. Now, Now, all this goes to the Green Party. I'm going to auction these off to the winner. So who wants to start? And I'll autograph it if you'd like. Who wants to start at 75 bucks? Who wants to go beyond that? Huh? What do I hear? Huh? Azul, what is it? 100. What do I hear above 100? 200, that away. What do I hear above 200? 300. What do I hear above 300? What do I hear? 500. We're on our way, Greens. What do I hear? What do I hear above 500? 600. By the way, this would go on eBay for that autograph. 600. What do I hear above 600? 700. Above 700. Above 700. 750, we got 750, 750 on the way. What about, what's higher? What do we have above? Yeah, what? 800, we got 800. We're getting close to $1,000. $1,000, here we go. Okay. What do we have? What do we have above 1,000? Let's start climbing. 1,200 in the back. That away, 1,200. What do we have above 1,200? Who's going to go above 1,200? I'm getting hoarse. Who's going to go above 1,200? Huh? 1,200? How about 1,300? Going once. Going twice. Last call. We're up to 1,200. Okay. 1,200 goes to the gentleman there. Now, I, with your permission, can you put your hand up, please? Yeah, with your permission. What's your name? Harry? Okay. Harry, with your permission, I believe in consolation prizes. And I just happen to have another set. And if this gentleman who offered 1,000 would go for 1,000, I'll give it to you. 1,000. Okay. 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 Here we are. I'll be down there to sign them for you. Matt, can you contact the two gentlemen? Yeah.
I already have a copy. Maybe you can sell it again.
Oh, but you want to sell it again? Woo! Okay. All right. We've raised $2,200 in about 8-9 minutes. Who wants to start the bid new here on this? Who was the one who went 800? 800. You want to go for it? Huh? By the way, I even have another pen. Matt, what happened to the other pen, Matt? We'll get you another pen. We got 800? 800? 800? Do we have 800? Okay. Anybody want to go higher? 900. 900. Anybody want to go higher? Anybody want to go higher? Wow, watch this. We're already up to, let's see, 2,200, 800, that's 3,900. With your permission, can I give this $800 gentleman a consolation prize? Okay, now, what are we up to? We're up to 1,200, 800, 2,000, 2,800, $3,700. You see what the Spirit does. And thank you for that. Thank you for that. So, there's nothing that can stop the Green Party once the energy bandwagon rolls. You got the best agenda, the deepest, the broadest, the most humane, the most practical agenda on one after the other of the nation's greatest problems, deprivations, and injustices. It's all about human energy and just the kind of simple collaboration right now that raised this kind of money for your party. Thank you very much.